just how much you set my lonely heart on fire and filled me with desire. And then I thought that this just can't be true when I first saw you. Far above me, I thought you'd never love me. I dared to dream that you could love me too. You set my lonely heart on fire, I thought that this just can't be true when I first saw you. It was then I knew I was meant just for you.
Why do you go on pretending? You know you wanna be free, darling, you know.
All right, I'd like to call to order the March 16th, 2017 meeting of the Board of Harbor Commissioners. Jeanette, will you please call roll?
Yes, Jim Sloan.
Here.
Betsy Kramer.
Present.
Merritt McCrae. Here. Bill Spicer and Lang Sly are absent tonight.
Okay. Scott, are there any changes to the agenda tonight?
Mr. Chair, tonight we have one change to the agenda. Item number 7, Waterfront Department fiscal year 2018 and 2019 budget recommendation has been continued to next month's meeting in April.
Okay.
So it'll be a little briefer meeting tonight, and we'll give Brian a break.
I'm sure Brian was prepared, but any other changes or additions?
No other changes or additions, thank you.
Okay. Okay, well, now would be the time we would take public comment, but for things that are not on the agenda. And so I don't see anybody here that, or we haven't received any slips for anything, so let's move right along. We need to approve the minutes. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, pass unanimously. Let's move on to the department updates. Scott, the director's report.
Sure. Good evening, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. The Harbor benefited from the Army Corps of Engineering authorizing additional emergency dredge funding during this spring dredge cycle, which we're right in the middle of right now. Just in terms of background, waterfront staff retained Carpy and Clay, Inc., formerly known as E. Dell Smith and Company, beginning in fiscal year 1990 to assist in dealing with the federal government regarding the acquisition of the Naval Reserve Center building and Army Corps of Engineers funding for projects, particularly involving dredging. And after that time, there was also a project, an 80-20 split, where the federal government would pay 80% and the waterfront would pay 20%, or the city, to acquire our own dredge and take that over from them. Fortunately, that did not take place. But Carpy and Clay is basically a lobbying and advocacy firm based out of Washington, D.C., and one of our main links with the Army Corps when dredging issues come up, as they have the last several years now. Although we continue to work directly with federal officials through the California Marine Affairs and Navigation Conference, otherwise known as CMANC, Carpy and Clay provides a more direct and continuous approach to the congressional decision makers in Washington, and they also have direct contact with the Assistant Secretary of the Army and Corps of Engineers South Pacific Division, and representatives of which were a part of the South Pacific Division. And these are the agencies that are responsible for the allocation of emergency funds. and working with staff, Carl and I got on the phone with our Julie Minerva, our representative in Washington, and we were able to, Carpenter Clay was able to develop some important reasons and help convince the Corps to scare up $500,000 in additional dredge funding and emergency funds for the spring cycle. It's about 70,000 cubic yards of additional dredge material. So right now the dredge is, well, you'll hear a little more from Carl, but it's taking a little break right now while they drop the paperwork and actually get us those emergency funds. So the cost of that lobbying effort is about $21,000 a year. So I think this $500,000 here paid for it for quite some time into the future. So it's been a worthwhile program for us.
And we had to do that last year, or year before? We had to do some emergency dredging in the last couple of years.
Yes, we've had to last year also,
Yeah.
for particularly the same reasons. The swell angle was coming straight into the harbor and pushing much more sediment in than we could get out.
Right, right. So that group's done a good job for us.
Yes, they have. So we're very happy with the Corps about that. And then tentative items for the April meeting will be the Clean Marina report. We'll have others by then too.
And the budget.
Well, now the budget too, as well.
All right. Any questions, comments? Great, thank you. Moving ahead to business services, Ryan?
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. I have a brief business report for you this evening regarding one of our many tenants. For folks visiting the harbor recently, you may have noticed that the iconic Brophy Brothers is in the midst of a construction project, and it's aimed at a number of improvements to the kitchen and bar areas. So the kitchen improvements will include a complete renovation of the floor and the subfloor, as well as all new plumbing, new ventilation, new drywall, and a fresh coat of paint. The famous bar area will also receive new plumbing, all new fixtures, as well as a new floor and subfloor, as well as a completely remodeled look. The bar will stay, but it's a remodeled look that will be opening up the views to the harbor even more. In addition, the restaurant as a whole will receive new lighting, as well as a fresh coat of paint and acoustical upgrades that will kind of quiet it down when you're up there, make it a little bit easier to talk and communicate with folks. So the project is scheduled to be done, or I should say will be done, on Monday, March 20th, so stop on by. And although a lot of the improvements are things that you're not going to see, you will notice the paint and the upgrade, some of the upgrades. So stop on by and check it out. And that is the end of my happy to answer any questions.
Great, thanks. Any questions, comments? Thanks, Brian. Okay, moving ahead. Carl?
Good evening, Chair Sloan and Commissioners. Tonight we're going to talk about a couple of different projects, the first of which is a couple of projects related to Harbor Patrol boats. In an effort to maintain our state-of-the-art fleet, we have two different projects, one related to the replacement of Boat 1 and the repowering of Boat 2. First of all, I've reported to the Commission a couple times about replacing Boat 1. It's going to replace a 1983 Radden, 20 feet long, with a 22-foot center console Radden, another one. They began construction in July, and the build has gone as planned for the most part, with a couple of minor snafus related to the fire pump engine issues. This boat has firefighting capability and a separate engine just for the fire pump. And there was some question as to the California Air Resources Board requirements related to the emissions for that. And it's really a different standard for something like an auxiliary engine than it is for the drive engine. The supplier was confused, and it caused some delays. So unfortunately, that part of the project hasn't been completed yet, but the rest of the boat is done. So we just took delivery, which is kind of nice. The new boat on the left has not only bigger letters, but it's a little bit bigger boat, a little longer and a little wider. We just took it last week and have started working on it, work out some of the bugs. It's a great boat so far. A couple of issues typical of any commissioning any new vessel. Some of the radios need to be worked on, minor fuel leak, and typical bugs associated with the build of any new boat. In general, for a new boat, these issues are really minor, and the boat's going to be used like a regular boat until it's time to put the new fire pump engine in. This boat, we went out to bid, received a couple of bids. Our lowest responsible bid was $214,000. Just by way of reminder, we included a repowering of patrol boats in our capital improvement program a couple of years ago. we had identified $110,000 for repowering this boat in the 2016, and we also started a vessel reserve fund a few years ago, by way of reminder, and we started off with about $75,000 per year. We were able to combine those funds and appropriate some more funds out of some capital reserves to buy a new boat. So we had quite a bit invested just to repower a boat that was over 30 years old and decided to buy a new one. And it's turned out to be great so far. The boat runs well, it's very, very nice, and it seems like a wise use of funds for a boat that's relatively old. It's going to be brand new. The other project is repowering Boat 2. Boat 2 is more or less kind of the workhorse of the fleet when it comes to offshore responses. Boat 1's used mostly inshore, and Boat 2's a little bigger boat. 2 diesel engines in the project. It's a 32-foot Radden with firefighting capability, and the project involves replacing twin 350 horsepower diesel engines. We went out to bid recently, got a low bid of $116,000 from Marine Services, which is a reputable local agency, local firm that's worked on some of our boats in the past, and a real regular fixture in the harbor. This is the FY17 project for repowering boats. We have another one in FY18 for Boat 3. Something that's kind of unique about this boat is we're going to repower it this fiscal year. Should be done by June, more or less, actually in about 3 or 4 weeks. And these engines last about 5 years. In about 5 years, this boat's going to be very old. It was built in 1984. So using our vessel reserve funds, we're looking to buy a new boat, just similar to Boat 1. So we'll be updating our fleet. In the meantime, it's going to be reliable, work well, and have a couple of new engines. Something I mentioned in my staff report is when Boat 2 is repowered and when Boat 1 is fully commissioned with a new fire pump engine, we're going to have one extra boat. And you had asked in a previous Harbor Commission meeting what we're going to do with that. Mick and I were on the phone with an auction company that the city uses for surplus properties, and so we're going to probably coordinate with them to dispose of this boat through an auction-type process, and we're thinking about marketing it directly to boating safety agencies. It's a good boat, a strong hull. We have a decent engine we can put in it, and so for any boating safety agency that doesn't have $200,000 to spend, and considerably less, but needs a responsive boat that's very, very seaworthy, it'd be really easy for them to pick this up. So we think that's a good strategy, and this auction firm that we talked to at length yesterday, it's something they do. So we'll see that going out to market here very soon, and we'll report back to you on what sort of success we have. The second project tonight is the dredging. I think a lot of you read about that or seen some news about it recently this year. The Sandpiper, this is a new dredge by Pacific Dredge, has been put to work this year like I don't think they ever imagined. Once again, for the second year in a row, we've had excessive sand deposition from a series of large storms. It got to the point where the channel was about 40 feet wide with a controlling depth of 7 feet at low tide, and that's just not adequate for any large vessel at all, and so it created a lot of problems for us. We were able to work with the Corps of Engineers to get them to begin to let a contract early, and they began dredging about 3 weeks early. They also authorized an additional 30,000 cubic yards on top of the 120,000 cubic yards that's in their regular contract for about 150,000 yards. But that's not nearly enough to take care of all the sand that's there. Once again, the Coast Guard declared a safety zone, which means that vessels had to contact Harbor Patrol to get authorization approval to move in and out of the harbor and possibly an escort. That safety zone declaration was February 23rd. About a week later, there was a channel punched through the sand spit adequate for boats to move in and out of, although the safety zone declaration was lifted just today, as a matter of fact. So people can go in and out of the harbor just like regular. They've removed 130,000 cubic yards to date. The channel is probably at least 80 feet wide and 20 feet deep, so half the channel is open to all the vessels. But where they really focused on was a new, deeper channel as opposed to digging out the one that's only 7 feet deep. They had a lot of problems dredging this cycle. They ran into a tremendous amount of storm debris that would suck up through the pump, and they've sort of ruined their discharge pump. So they're going to be down for a couple of weeks. They're able to open a deep channel, so it's business as usual, just a narrow channel. They'll resume dredging probably by the end of this month. As Scott mentioned, we did secure an additional $500,000. There's a mistake up there. It's about 70,000 cubic yards. So we're going to wind up dredging about a total of 100,000 cubic yards more than normal this year with the additional funds we've been able to secure. So, as you mentioned, Pacific Dredge and the Corps of Engineers have really stepped up again this year. It's unfortunate it's the second year in a row, but Mother Nature has the final word on when the channel's going to be open, how much sand we get. But we're in pretty good shape, and we should be in very good shape for the summer. And this concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, it appears that the new boat one is considerably more capable than the old boat one ever was, even new. Looks like it has firefighting capabilities, which is new to the harbor, so we have 3 vessels.
Chair Sloan, Commissioner McCrae, that's correct. Boats 2 and 3 have had firefighting capabilities since we acquired them. It turns out that we didn't think we'd be able to do it, and then we looked at a couple boats down in Lake Castaic, and they had a small fire pump engine, and it works just great. We tested it out, and this boat is very similar to what they had down there. So once we learned we could get that capability in such a small boat, we decided to go with it.
That's a great improvement, I think, for the whole harbor.
Yeah, thank you.
Betsy?
Thanks, Carl, for your report. I'm wondering, do you have any idea, or does anyone have any idea where all the extra sand is coming from? Is it because of the heavy rains and perhaps from the San Ynez River, or whatever? I mean, it seems kind of unusual.
Chair Sloan, Commissioner Kramer, the sand transport is a function of the large waves. The source is obviously, as you mentioned, a function of rainfall and discharges from the rivers and creeks, of which for the first time in 5 or 6 years we finally had large flows in sediments discharging into the near shore. So that probably contributes to it. There's enough sand just on Ledbetter Beach and just up coast on any given year. If it all is mobilized at once, it can kind of fill our harbor. Our harbor channel is small. We don't have a sand trap like Ventura Channel Islands Harbor, so if a lot of sand comes at once, it fills our channel up, unlike those other harbors where they have close to 1 million cubic yards of capacity of sand to move in and be stored before it actually gets into the channel where boats move in and out. But I think you're right. I think there's part of the sand supply was from all the discharge from the rain in the creeks and the rivers just up coast to Santa Barbara.
Okay, thanks. And probably from Goleta Beach also.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. I had one question or a couple of questions, and part of it's just curiosity. So what brand of engines are in the new boat?
Chair Sloan, we have Volvos.
Okay, and is that what we would repower the other boat with?
That's what the bid came in at.
Okay.
They specified Volvos.
So we'll have common power and everything.
Yeah, they're very similar.
Good. And then will that have a new fire pump as well put in?
Boat 2 won't have a new fire pump engine. The fire pump engine is pretty solid right now.
Okay.
But we'll replace it as necessary.
Right.
It gets so much less use, they tend to last longer and a little more reliable.
And it's a lot smaller engine also.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great. That's all I had. Thank you. Harbor Operations, Mick?
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Well, when I reported to you last month about the January storms, I thought that was going to be the big storm report of the winter. But it turns out on February 17th, and let me say this a few times, alluding back to what Carl was saying, and we got a heck of a southeaster, 35-plus knot winds and huge seas. I'm going to show you some slides here in a little bit. What was the damage? Well, it grounded 5 boats, wiped out our protective sand berm for the 3rd time, tore loose 6 pilings from Stearns Wharf, and clogged the harbor with all manner of debris, created the dangerous shoaling that Carl alluded to. 4 of the 5 grounded boats landed on East Beach. The other landed up down by the Biltmore. And curiously enough, 2 of them came off the moorings. That's the first time in a long time we've seen anything come off the moorings. I've been in contact with mooring installers and with at least one of the 2 mooring permittees. And from what we can tell, on one of them for sure, the other one we're not sure where the failure point was, but one of them for sure, it just ripped the top out of the mooring. It just flat out tore it out. This is one of those, as Carl put it, what Mother Nature rules the day or something like that. This was a Mother Nature thing. It was amazing. And we did our very best to get everybody in the harbor, as we talked about last month, though I do owe you an apology, Mr. Chair. I told you that we got everybody in. We got everybody off of their boats, but that still was a surprise to me to find out there was one individual who did the Mount Washington thing. Remember when the guy stayed up there? And we talked to him and tried to get him off his boat, and he was going to ride her out, quote unquote. And thankfully, it turned out well. But again, you know, for you and anyone listening, the most dangerous thing you can do is stay in your boat in a storm when there's an opportunity with today's good weather forecasting to come in before the storm, not only because you risk your life, but you also risk our lives, too. When our Harbor Patrol goes out there to get you, they're not going to not go out. And rescues in terrible storms like that are extremely dangerous for everybody involved. So a word to the wise, get in and out of the storm, okay? That's not to you, of course. You're the conduit to the boaters. They should all come in before these big storms. We also had so much debris in the harbor. You're familiar with our salad boat? We'll talk more about it next month during the Clean Marina program report. But we had to employ them for what's called extra work in their contract. And they were there for 5 days plus, cost us $17,000 for their crew to spend that time down there getting big debris out and small debris. We had this kind of mulch-like mucky stuff, dirty-looking stuff. It wasn't so much a hazard. You could drive through it, but when boats would drive through it, they'd suck it up into their seawater cooling systems, if you will, their raw water pumps, clog their pumps, wore down their pumps, clogged their filters, and they ended up dead in the water, several of them. So not only did the Cushman contracting crew, who was down there for 5 days, and I'll show you these slides, have to get all the big debris out. There was plenty of logs and what have you, and tree limbs and things. They had to deal with this mulchy-looking stuff, and I'm saying it was mulch. I don't know what it was, really, and we would only be speculating to try and say. But they actually put a boom around it at one point and utilized that, and they used the debris nets that we have placed all around the harbor, and it got them out. So that was as much of the effort as anything, is getting that stuff out of the harbor. So that was a $17,000 effort. It took $1,800, which was a great price for Marburg to help us out with the boats on the beach. And we actually came across a boat that had been there for many, many years, and due to the scouring of the beach, showed itself. It was a steel boat. And Marburg, being the great partners they are on this abandoned boat stuff and in general for the city, they actually got that boat out too. So we ended up with a net gain, if you will. It got more boats out than went aground, which is kind of an unusual deal. So, and Carl talked about the safety zone, and we covered that. And so what I'd like to do is share some slides with you before we move on to less precarious issues. This is what the storm looked like on February 17th. This was shot from near the southerly terminus of Stearns Wharf. As you can see, it was not a day to be at sea. And here you can see why we lost 6 pilings, right? This is the same kind of swell activity that blew the windows out of Moby Dick. I think it was 2 years ago. And the same kind of swell activity tore those pilings out. At one point, we had to, for a temporary time, only about, I think it was about an hour and a half, we had to close entrance into the wharf. We didn't close the exit side, but we closed entrance into the wharf because of the combination of the tide and the swell. It was feeling like it was going to start tickling the bottoms of the deck boards, but that passed quickly. As the tide dropped, we reopened the entrance side of the wharf. The classic, this could be out of a file photo, the classic beached boat. This one, the one in the foreground, folks got to, the owner and his posse, if you will, got to it right after the storm and got as much off it as they could by hand, and what was left there was removed by Marburg, another boat that the taggers got to before Marburg did, but not much before Marburg. And this is the boat, the steel boat that bared itself, if you will, during our inspections of East Beach. And we expected this was really going to be a bear to get out. We didn't know how deep it went. And Marburg, God bless them, they got under that thing and they got it out. So, you know, when these things happen, the way we look at it is, you know, thank goodness this isn't August on a low tide and some kid's running down the beach, you know, in his bare feet. So I'm always glad to get every bit of this debris out of the shoreline as we can. And the construction staging area for the bridge replacement project was not spared, as you can see, not spared at all. And then finally, these shots just basically show the enormous scouring of the beach that occurred. These drop-offs down to the beach grew to about 5 or 6 feet. All the leveling of the beach basically disappeared, and it was scoured right down to that boat you saw. And here is what's left of the sand berm after the storm surged, wiped it out for the third time. But it's always important to look at this as a plus and a minus. The minus is we lost our berm. The plus is it did its job. It's really intended to some degree to be a sacrificial amenity, if you will, and it did what it did. It protected the harbor commercial area from flooding, and you can see it protected the yacht club. And this is a good shot showing the scouring of the beach. The dredge crew had already relocated the pipe, which you see there, up above onto barely up onto solid ground. But what you see there is some debris and some rubble. But that's what the quote-unquote beach looked like after the February 17th storm came through. And this is the affirmation, what I firmly, let's try it again. What I referred to earlier as the debris and muck in the harbor, aforementioned. That's what I meant. You see the sticks, logs, debris, and then you see that mulchy kind of stuff, which really literally landlocked the boats for several days in the harbor. This is how thick it was. It was like gooey, muddy coffee. It was really something to see. I've never seen anything like it myself. And there you can see how it would landlock the boats in their place. And took a lot of work by a four-man crew, and I want to thank Cushman Contracting again for the terrific work they did. It costs money to keep the harbor clean, but that's what we do. We clean it up, and we figure out how to pay for it. And we have dedicated funds to pay for this kind of stuff. We had to amend the purchase order, but that's okay. That's why we do what we do. And this is one of two 11-yard dumpsters they filled. Those boats in the background are literally in the background. They're not part of what got pulled out and disposed of. But that's one of two of the, we filled two, they filled two 11-yard dumpsters of that debris that came into the harbor. There's a shot of one of them. You can see it looks like you're fertilizing your property or something. Probably would work for that. But that's what a lot of it was, and it wasn't easy to contain. And this is a shot of the typical stuff that was floating around the harbor. You hit that with your propeller, you're off to the boatyard. So we spent a lot of time grabbing stuff ourselves, and the Cushman folks grabbed stuff, our maintenance folks grabbed stuff, and boaters grabbed stuff. And they were also using those debris nets to scoop this muck out of the harbor, so it was really a team effort. And we had volunteers, you see they're down there with bags, helping clean up the garbage in between all of the natural-born litter, if you will. So we really thank, not even sure exactly who these were. Somebody organized a team. It could have been the Beach Angels. I'm not sure, but somebody organized a whole bunch of folks to go down there and clean debris off of East Beach, which we're very thankful for if they're listening. So that's the end of my report on that. I do have a few more items to pursue here. On a more spring-like, happy note, the Yacht Club celebrated its opening of the season on March 5th. They had a gathering at the Yacht Club followed by their annual Casper race. Got really breezy in the afternoon. I think they cut it a little bit short, but they did get out on the water, and it was a great day for those folks. And, of course, the opening of the Yacht Club season signals the opening of Wet Wednesdays, and Wet Wednesdays are underway. And as a reminder, they'll go through mid-October, and the races are open to any boat entered by a member of the U.S. Sailing Association recognized club, and locally that means the Santa Barbara Sailing Club and the Yacht Club, but anybody can be crew on these boats, whether you're a member of those clubs or not. They start at 5 o'clock. The courses are 2 to 8 miles, and the first race starts at 5:10, and as I said, they'll go through mid-October, so if it's not storm season, it's Wet Wednesday season, the only two seasons we have here at the waterfront. So we're transitioning from one to the other. And speaking of which, we have our two spring events coming up. You'll hear about it this month. And I'll try to be more brief next month, but I'm going to annoy you with it twice because these are really important events to us. On May 6th, we have our 11th annual Operation Clean Sweep. Can't believe it's been 11 years. Our volunteer seafloor cleanup effort. People have been calling me for the last 3 weeks. I had the Rotary Club call. I had the Sail and Power Squadron call. So folks are really enthused about this project. And with three docks, fingers, on Marina 3, it's going to be great help because we have a lot of diving to do, a lot of stuff to, well, hopefully not that much because we've already been there once, but stuff to extract, and the volunteer work is very much appreciated. Again, the briefing starts at the Travel Lift Pier at 8 a.m. on Saturday, May 6th, and we'll have a briefing with coffee and donuts, and then we'll head all over and a big troop over to Marina 3, and we'll get the job done over there. And at 11 o'clock, we'll have sandwiches delivered. I ordered extra sandwiches, and this year we're going to have a bunch of them cut in half because they're huge sandwiches, and I know not everybody needs to eat one of those giant sandwiches or wants to. So we're trying to save money where we can, but feed the troops at the same time. But they take 2 of them, that's all good. So anybody who wants to participate in Operation Clean Sweep, they can call me directly at 897-2587 or email me at mcronman@santabarbaraca.gov. That's mcronman@santabarbaraca.gov. And I think thanks to Ms. Samario's outreach efforts, people have already locked onto that website and that phone number. So I thank her for that. And following Saturday, on May 13th, we always do these back-to-back. We have our Harbor Nautical Swap Meet, which is always a blast as well. That's sponsored by our department and the Harbor Merchants Association, and that's where folks bring out every manner of boating goods you can think of to sail, trade, and what have you. Typical items include sailboat rigging, fishing gear, outboard motors, surfboards, paddleboards, kayaks, and everything else you can possibly imagine. Vendor spots are only $10 a piece. And sign-ups for that start on Monday, April 10th. So we're getting that information out. And we look for last year, I think we had 50-something vendors, and we're looking to have something along those lines, if not even better this year. And also, while taking inventory of what you might want to sell or buy for your boat, we're also going to have a hazmat turn-in day that day. So we'll have the hazmat disposal truck there. And that's a good time to go through your dock box, get out your hardened cans of paint, your varnish, your what have you, and get rid of them, get ready for a new boating season. And on the May billing, we'll be sending out the famous golden ticket will arrive. So folks possessing a golden ticket will have access to the hazardous materials disposal station. And the only reason we do that is because we've found out in the past if we don't do that, people find out there's a big hazmat turn-in day, and I don't really blame them. I would do the same thing myself, but, if I owned a lumber yard, I wouldn't bring, 5 tons of treated wood down there, which has happened in the past. So this is really intended to sort of make it a local event. That's why the golden ticket, and that entitles a slip permittee, of course, to come and dump any manner of hazardous materials that's related to their boat at the disposal site. And, of course, you don't need a ticket to participate in that swap meet. That's come one, come all. So, again, any questions? People can call. They should actually they can call me for information, but they should call to sign up. They should call our administrative number at 564-5531. That's 564-5531. Or, again, they can email me at mcronman@santabarbaraca.gov. And that's my report, Mr. Chair. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great. Merritt?
Yeah. What kind of volunteers do you take for Operation Clean Sweep? Do you have to be a certified diver, and what kind of gear do they need to bring?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner McCray, thank you for the question. We tend to use, and I apologize, it was in the report here, we tend to use our harbor dive service folks. We've had lots of right-minded divers want to volunteer for this, but we get enough from, Salty Dog and Scrub-a-Dub and 800 Dive and all those BAP groups that we typically, and our maintenance staff, and we typically have enough divers. We used to invite divers. There were some NOAA divers at one point, and some right-minded, certified, PADI-certified divers wanted to participate. But it's a little more difficult for us, not knowing who they are, not having a track record with them, not knowing, the individuals, if you will. It's easier for us to work with known dive crews to assign to the different fingers. So I wouldn't encourage folks to sign up for this to dive. I'd encourage them to sign up to volunteer as dock workers. Sure.
And for a volunteer, you don't need any equipment. They have the gloves, they have ropes, they have everything that you need down there.
That's right. Come hungry, wear the dirtiest clothes you have, and expect to maybe throw them out.
You will
when
get
you're
dirty.
done.
That's one thing that does happen. But okay, Betsy.
Thanks for your report, Mick. I've got a question about the boats that came ashore. Were any of them salvageable? That was part of the one question. And the second one, in terms of the 2 that came off the mooring, is the city liable at all for that? Or what's the situation?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Kramer, none of the boats were salvageable. And as to your second question, the city does not contract with the mooring permittees. The city is in the business of just issuing the permits. We entertained the problematic nature of the question you've asked. Not that your question is problematic, the notion is problematic in terms of legal liabilities. And we worked with the city attorney a long time ago when we were setting up this program. No, the city's not liable for those.
Thanks.
Sure.
I had a question about the storm and just some of the costs that we've talked about here tonight. I know that I think Santa Barbara County was declared a disaster area by the state. Is any of that funding available to cover any of the costs to clean up the harbor or any of the other costs?
Chair Sloan, yes, it is. We have compiled all our costs, actual costs and cost estimates, submitted it to FEMA and OES, Cal OES. Just today, Mick and I found out, I believe the first storm in January was declared a disaster by the president. We're still waiting on the February storm, so it looks like we'll be reimbursed. Our costs for both storms are under $100,000, but
Right.
they're in the tens of thousands of dollars, so they're enough to warrant pursuing reimbursement.
Yeah, they're significant and they're real costs. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
If I could just add to what Carl said, just on one cautionary note, we believe they're all reimbursable costs.
Right, right.
Of course, you remember that, the homes that went down, I guess it was El Capitan Creek and what have you. There are a lot of claims, and we've made the mark. So
Right.
we cross our fingers in terms of the way they prioritize the money, but we believe and hope that we'll get reimbursed for all of this.
Yeah, all we can do is submit them and see if we can get the grant money. So, okay, great, thanks. Thanks for all the reports. Okay, moving ahead here, we have some new business recommendations.
Item 6, baseline monitoring report, Southern California Marine Protected Areas. Recommendation that Harbor Commission receive a report from the Ocean Science Trust on baseline monitoring studies of marine protected areas in the South Coast region of California.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, just as a quick introduction, in 2012, following 18 months of stakeholder input, the state ultimately implemented a series of marine protected areas up and down the coast in several zones, and one is, of course, what they call the Southern California zone or area that stretches from Point Conception to the Mexican border. Merritt and I were integrally involved in that process as state-appointed stakeholders, and so today. We have officials who are contractors with I believe, the Ocean Protection Council, if I'm not mistaken, who has been tasked with doing baseline monitoring and following up and working on the adaptive management aspects of the marine protected areas and the MPA program. The presentation, if I understand it correctly, will highlight key findings from their baseline studies, their monitoring studies, including information from their State of the South Coast report and management of statewide network of the MPAs. And additionally, I think they're going to tell us about another meeting they're going to hold for our local community here coming up in a week or so. And I will turn it over to, I wanted to say Stacy, that's wrong. Sarah, thank you, Sarah, for correcting me.
All right, well, welcome, Sarah. We'll let you take it from there.
Thank you for the introduction, Mick. My name is Sarah Wheeler. I'm here on behalf of California Ocean Science Trust, commonly confused with the Ocean Protection Council, so I completely understand that. I'm here to share some of the results of baseline monitoring in the South Coast region. California is home to the largest scientifically designed and stakeholder-driven network of marine protected areas in the nation. This network includes 124 marine protected areas, 15 special closures that encompass approximately 16% of California's jurisdictional waters, including waters around the offshore islands. And over 9% of California's waters are in no-take marine protected areas. And so you can see those in red. So the MPAs are managed through the MPA Management Program, which collectively aims to implement and meet the 6 goals of the Marine Life Protection Act, or the MLPA. In summary, the goals seek to protect marine resources for various purposes, including biodiversity, habitat protection, and the functioning of ecosystems. One of the other goals is to provide recreational and educational opportunities in areas subject to minimal human disturbance. In addition, the MLPA seeks to ensure that the marine protected areas are managed as a statewide network. As part of the MLPA, it requires monitoring, research, and evaluation at specific sites, and this is designed to facilitate adaptive management of the MPAs. The monitoring results, combined with additional sources from experts, can inform the state's adaptive management, excuse me, to help us learn if the network is performing and meeting the goals of the MLPA. There are four components of the MPA management program, including education and outreach, research and monitoring, enforcement and compliance, and policy and permitting. And these four components help ensure that adaptive management of the program and to ensure that it's informed by partnerships. So to clarify some of the organizations involved in the MPA management program, this slide outlines four of the major bodies. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife is the managing agency responsible for all components of the program. The Ocean Protection Council is the lead for policy and implementation of MLPA activities. The Fish and Game Commission is the final decision maker for all existing and proposed regulations. And Ocean Science Trust is a nonprofit organization that supports science-informed decision-making for the state's ocean waters. The MPA monitoring program has two phases. Phase one is baseline monitoring, which has been occurring over the last several years. And phase two is long-term monitoring, which will be guided by the statewide MPA monitoring action plan. And this action plan is currently in development. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how these results are being used. First, and one of its primary functions, is to set a benchmark of information that we can track future change. So what the series of monitoring that has just taken place is really just setting that baseline condition so we have something to compare future surveys to. In addition, baseline monitoring can help inform how the Department of Fish and Wildlife manages MPAs and recommendations. And also, this baseline monitoring results provide regional considerations for the statewide MPA monitoring action plan. And this is in part because the monitoring occurred in different regions of the state separately. In addition, all these data are available publicly online. So there are many purposes that these data can serve beyond just MPA management. So as I mentioned, the state is developing a MPA monitoring program action plan, and that draft is in development and will be ready sometime in 2018. And there are four components that are guiding the drafting of that plan. The original monitoring plans, the results from baseline monitoring, additional expert input, and peer review and public comment that will be coming as part of, there we go, part of as that feeds into that action plan development. So I thought I'd give you a little bit of an overview of the South Coast region, which you can see on the right. The marine protected areas that were part of the MLPA were implemented January in 2012. They span from Point Conception to the U.S.-Mexico border, which is over 2,000 miles, and roughly 15% of those waters are in MPAs. There have been numerous organizations that have been involved in those four components of the MPA program that I mentioned earlier. So these activities are really building a network of people that are engaging on MPA monitoring, outreach, enforcement, and management. So if you're interested in learning about that community that I just showed on the last slide, if you're interested in some of the data, if you're interested in learning about some of the research projects that were involved as part of baseline monitoring, oceanspaces.org is the go-to website that has all of that information. What you can see on the left is the home page, and that can allow you to tap into the community, read blogs. And the right page is the South Coast State of the Region page. And that is the page where you'll be able to access the report that was just released on Monday that has all the results of baseline monitoring in the South Coast region. In addition, there's been numerous affiliate products that were developed, and some of them may have been delivered to you on your desk. And these are some snapshot reports that kind of hone in on a few focal areas of interest to folks. So there are these shorter products as well as the full report available online now, and all of that is on Ocean Spaces. I'd also like to share with you a flyer that provides some information about some upcoming events next week to share the results within this report. So this is part of our South Coast Roadshow, starting in San Diego on March 20th and ending here in Santa Barbara on March 24th at the Marine Science Classroom. So these are a series of community gathering events that are open to the public, and we encourage you all to come. Our flyer is available on Ocean Spaces. And there are 3 components to each community gathering event. First, there will be an overview of the results that will be provided by the Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Ocean Science Trust, as well as the Ocean Protection Council. So there'll be an overview presentation. There'll also be a series of science talks by contributing scientists that were involved in baseline monitoring to share some of those interesting stories that came out from baseline monitoring. And then at the end, there will also be a panel discussion and Q&A. And so our panel will have folks from diverse fields, including members of the DFW staff, tribal members, as well as the collaboratives members, some of the management team. So that will help share information about all the partnerships that were involved in baseline monitoring. And with that, I would just like to thank you for your time and for inviting me to come here today and share about the program, and I'd be happy to take any of your questions.
Any questions, Betsy?
I don't have any questions. I want to thank you for your report, and I look forward to the 24th and the presentation then. So
Wonderful.
Thanks a lot. It looks really interesting.
Merritt?
Yeah, I did take a look at your website. I noticed that the test link is still up. Within the website, it looks like it was the first link that you put up. But
I will take note of that. Thank you for raising that.
I also noticed, and this is something that I was pretty aware of already, that although the vast majority of waters in marine protected areas are in depths of, say, deeper than diver depth, deeper than about 30 meters or so, the vast majority of the scientific work that was done so far has been in waters shallower than that, with a few exceptions. And I was wondering if there was ever, if you had any intention of doing a gap analysis to look at what kind of data you have and what kind of data you truly need to address looking at all those different habitats?
That is a really good question, and I would certainly bring that to the management team, and I can share that with them after today's meeting, and I encourage you to bring it on the 24th. But I will bring to your attention that there is one snapshot series on ROV work, so this was using some submersibles to get at some of those deeper habitats, so I do know that there was effort to explore those. So I think you could find some information there in that snapshot and section of the report. And there's also a technical report associated with that ROV report. So if you go to the snapshot at the bottom of it, it will link you to the full technical report. And I also acknowledge that there's a lot of logistical challenges that I'm sure you're aware of in your work associated with just getting physically to the deeper habitats. So I thought I'd just acknowledge that there. I'm sure that there was some careful thought in thinking about how to monitor those deeper habitats. But I will raise that question, and we'll see if we can get back to you on their thinking around that in future plans.
Thank you.
I had one question, and it's really a point of clarification. When you say baseline monitoring, I think that's before a project starts. But you said that the MLPAs were established in 12, were 5 years later, and we're just now doing baseline. So how was the original MLPAs established if we didn't have baseline data back then? And how would we know before the MLPAs, and how would we know when we might change the designation?
That is a great question, and certainly, the timing is challenging. So a lot of the monitoring started, right after implementation, and so this, over the last 5 years has been that baseline period for which future change, 10, 20 years, into the future that we can compare that to. There are existing monitoring efforts that took place prior that were separate from the MLPA that we can draw upon to gain some information. So there was the PSCO network, and there was Reef Check and some other organizations that had already done some monitoring. I don't know how the prior data feeds into their assessments moving forward, but that is something that could be raised at the community gathering meeting, because there will be folks there that can speak to that question. I do have a slide in the back that has some of the timing. So you can see in the South Coast, we're right at that 5-year review, and that data collection period occurred from 2011 to 2015. So it was over those full 5 years.
6 years.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions, comments? Well, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thanks for having me.
Mr. Chair, if I might, Sarah, just so people aren't looking for the Marine Science classroom, it's the Marine Center classroom on Friday the 24th. I think it's 4 to 6, is that right? I'm pretty sure that's it. Yeah. So it's the Marine Center classroom next door to the Harbor Patrol offices. 125.
Marine Center classroom, thank you.
Sure.
Yes, from
That's okay,
4
we're
to
even
6,
now for the Ocean
and I have
Protection
some
Council.
paper copies of the flyers if I can leave those with you as well. Thank you.
All right. Anything else? I think it's time for commission staff communications. Anything on your end, Scott?
Nothing from staff tonight, Mr. Chair.
Anything from commission? Betsy?
Yeah. I've got a question, Mr. Eidman. I noticed at the city council meeting that you spoke, or at least I caught in the tail end, you were referred to in terms of the New Beginnings parking, and that the waterfront is dedicating 1 or 2 spaces. Which lots are those spaces?
Mr. Chair,
I didn't
Commissioner
look at the
Kramer.
whole, I didn't see the whole meeting, so I don't know what you said in the first part, if you said anything.
Yeah, I was there at the meeting on Tuesday,
Yeah.
but I didn't speak.
Oh, okay, well.
Maybe you heard Kathy
Some-
speak of
I
him.
think Kathy referred to
It was
2
probably,
spaces,
yeah,
thank you.
Kathy Murillo mentioned my name.
Yes, she did.
We have offered 5 nighttime parking spaces for the New Beginnings clients, and they've been using 2 pretty much each night. That there are certain prerequisites that they have to satisfy to be in the program, including a driver's license, an operable vehicle that's insured and registered. And so not everybody can meet all of those and can participate in the program. So that's why we have 2 out of 5 currently operating in or spending the nights in our lot.
Which lots?
Well, we try and spread them around, and also just due to NBCC would prefer not to reveal exactly where they're all at, just for security reasons and that kind of thing. And we'll also be participating with them in daytime parking as well, but we don't want to have the same folks that are in the nighttime parking stay over for the daytime, because then they will never leave. So we want to have some turnover there. So we're trying to spread them around so they're not all grouped up and
Well,
real obvious that way.
The first year I was on the Harbor Commission, there was the discussion of having them in the Garden Street, and the vote was 4-1 in opposition, and I was the one in favor of it at the time, so I was just been interested in the program.
Yes, there are several in that area.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Anything else? All right, I think that wraps it up. If somebody would like to move to adjourn,
Move to adjourn.
all in favor? Aye. Opposed? That's it. Thank you.